ICTs and accessibility for people with disabilities and special needs. This is a special track on a series of workshops that we're kicking off today under the WSIS Forum 2022. In a few minutes, we will start. But before, I'd invite you all to watch the WSIS 2022 video, and then we'll kick off with a panel of 6 very engaging speakers and a welcome by the GenSec. So welcome back once again. Happy to kick off today's session and the series of workshop on ICT and accessibility for persons with disabilities, special needs. We have 6 exciting panelists, 4 of which are from the private sector and 2 from international organizations. And also, please note that this session has human capturing. So again, we're trying to increase the accessibility of the WSIS Forum on a continuous basis. First of all, I'd like to welcome Deputy Secretary General of the ITU and our first speaker, Mr. Malcolm Johnson. Malcolm, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to this special track of the WSIS Forum 2022. On ICTs and accessibility for persons with disabilities and specific needs. It was the late Stephen Hawking that said, with the technology at our disposal, the possibilities are unbounded. It was the technology that literally gave him a voice, and that's proof of what he said. The panelists who have joined us today are truly following the Stephen Hawking spirit and showing us the unbounded possibilities offered by digital technologies. So many thanks to all the panelists for being with us today. According to WHO, over 1 billion people live with some form of disability. And of these, 80% live in developing countries where the challenges and the barriers they face, particularly women and children, are often so much steeper. For many of us, going online to pay bills, further our education, or access information and medical advice has become the norm, and especially so since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Advances in digital technology have enabled many of us to cope with and adapt to this new reality. But sadly, too many persons with disabilities and specific needs haven't been able to benefit. To change this, digital technologies must be accessible and inclusive in design. And that's where ITU standardization work plays an important role, to make accessibility a requirement right from the start of the design work on a new standard, and mainstreaming accessibility in the development of the standard. We also make every effort to include persons with disabilities in contributing to the work. And we work closely with the WHO on the development of these standards. And a recent good example is the standard that defines the technical requirements of telehealth platforms to facilitate their access and use by persons with disabilities, older persons with age-related disabilities, and persons with specific needs. ITU also develops a number of global guidelines, toolkits, and reports and other resources on how to build inclusive digital communities. And we help our members monitor and track their progress towards the implementation of accessibility. With the support of the WSIS community and in collaboration with stakeholders from across government, industry, and civil society, this special track will run each day this week. It includes workshops raising awareness, discussing trends and perspectives, and exploring innovative solutions to these unique challenges. And as Morten mentioned, we'll be providing live captioning to all these sessions. Our Knowledge Cafe, which will be held during the final week of the WSIS Forum, that's from the 30th of May to the 3rd of June, will bring all our stakeholders together to share solutions, knowledge, and good ideas on living healthier, fuller lives and ensuring digital inclusion for all. We will be providing full remote participation during that week, but we hope that many of you will be able to join us in person for the first time since before COVID. Many thanks again to you, Morten, for taking on the role of moderator for this session. And I wish you all a very enjoyable and fruitful session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Morten.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. And we're greatly appreciative that you highlighted some of the activities that ITU has been doing in terms of standards. Now, as a former civil servant myself, working for the Danish Agency for Digitization, one of my final crimes as a civil servant was to introduce minimum usability criteria for public websites and online services. So Sebastian Mantra, as a senior digital advisor at the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, how does accessibility and digital accessibility for persons with disabilities or special needs fit into the Commonwealth's office and the government's work?
Thanks for the question. So I guess what I'd like to do first is just briefly explain the sort of overall framework, and then I can sort of say where digital accessibility fits within that. And sort of in a nutshell, the FCDO's approach to digital development is focused on supporting inclusive, responsible, and sustainable digital transformation in partner countries. So I'm going to break that down. So there are 4 mutually reinforcing objectives: digital transformation, digital responsibility, digital sustainability, and digital inclusion. And digital transformation is all about supporting and developing an emerging country to embrace digital technologies, products, services, and processes that positively disrupt and transform their governments, economies, and societies. So that's the transformation piece. The digital responsibility piece is about supporting a safe, secure, and resilient digital environment. So this ensures that people, institutions, businesses can manage the challenges of an increasingly connected digital world. And it means that they will trust the use of digital technologies for social development, economic growth, civic engagement, and political participation. Digital sustainability piece is about supporting partner countries to embrace digital technologies in a way that reduces environmental costs. And it's also about stimulating digital solutions that enable climate change resilience and adaptation. And last but not least, we have inclusion. And this is possibly our most important objective, as we want to ensure that no one is left behind in a digital world. We want to see a situation where institutions, businesses, and people in our partner countries can all harness digital communication and tools for inclusive economic growth, social development, and open and transparent. So in practice, this means inclusive and affordable activity, basic digital literacy and skills, locally relevant digital content and services for underserved communities and excluded groups. So that's with an emphasis on gender, age, socioeconomic background, remote location, and other exclusion factors such as disability. So the issue of digital accessibility for persons living with disabilities and specific needs is central to our digital inclusion agenda, but it also kind of fits in with the other aspects that I mentioned. So for example, with digital transformation, for example, government services, there's a need to incorporate digital accessibility requirements. Or it's about under digital responsibility, it's about raising awareness of cyber threats and harms, or combining cyber hygiene skills with basic digital literacy, and adapting and integrating them into accessibility interventions. So that's a kind of a broad view of our kind of approach, and then kind of how the digital accessibility fits within that. Thank you.
Can you give like a couple of key examples of what you have specifically assisted with? This could be on standards, as Malcolm was saying, or it could be on affordable access to devices, or even to connectivity, which in some countries and some communities still is a challenge.
Sure. So I'd like to highlight one of our flagship programs, which is the Digital Access Program. It's been operational since 2019. It works in Brazil, Indonesia, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And the program is focused on inclusive, affordable, safe and secure digital connectivity, as well as digital skills, content and services for underserved communities and excluded groups. And the program also builds cybersecurity governance, businesses, and supports local digital ecosystems to generate digital innovations for local development challenges and stimulate digital entrepreneurship and create skilled jobs. So that's the kind of overall program. But within that, we conducted an in-depth digital development diagnostics in those 5 countries that I mentioned to prioritize the most relevant activities. And we observed that people living with disabilities and specific needs tend to be excluded or underserved. And that then led to the design and implementation of specific projects to enhance digital accessibility. So we worked in Kenya with the Association for the Physically Disabled of Kenya and a local consultancy called Inspire Africa in collaboration with the Kenya National Association for the Deaf and Kenya Union of the Blind and the Huduma Centers for Government Digital Services. And together with a range of stakeholders, including key government institutions, we're helping to improve persons with disabilities access to digital government services. And we're doing that through increased digital literacy and improved digital infrastructure, better assistive technologies. And so they're working on achieving these outcomes by sensitizing and training government officials in making these services accessible, and conducting capacity and infrastructural assessments, installing required software or hardware for realizing that. And the project will be completed in June 2022. Another example be working in Kenya with the Brazilian Network Information Center in collaboration with the Ministry of Economy and Ministry of Health. We delivered a study on e-government accessibility to adapt government digital platforms. It's also producing analytic, practical inputs, documents and tools to the government of Brazil, which has had access to implement accessible digital transformation strategies to ensure adequate treatment of persons with disability and to implement public health policies. And the project supports the creation and implementation of accessible digital solutions for public services. It facilitates the creation and accessibility of a policy framework to set out standards in line with the Brazilian government digital transformation policies, And Brazilian Network Information Center is also conducting a knowledge transfer workshops with government officials to promote awareness and adoption of best practice for improving accessibility of government services. I'm going to stop there but I've got a couple of other examples I could go through, but I just wanted to check in about time.
Thank you, Sebastian, for keeping an eye on the time. Thank you so much for the examples that you gave. This leads me to ask you, Vindra, a couple of questions here. So as the co-founder of Trust Vision, or Vision Empowerment, as your foundation is called, you've worked directly with the special needs community, persons living with disabilities. You are, in fact, yourself an example of how to succeed through formal education, etc. But what is the role that technology actually plays in the everyday lives of people with visual impairment?
I think technology is the biggest enabler for people with visual impairments. Pretty much everything I do as a visually impaired person, I depend heavily on technology for my for completing my daily tasks. Even if I'm joining Zoom meeting today, it is because of my screen reader that reads out everything that comes on my computer. That's why I'm able to join the Zoom meeting at the first place. So when you talk about visual impairment, so before technology evolved, people with visual impairments were heavily dependent on people who could see for even the simplest tasks. So now education has become so much easier. Suppose I get a message on WhatsApp, I will be quickly able to identify what the photo is, what the image is. With so many apps that are there currently, I will be able to know what text is in the image. Now, if I want to know anything that is there on the website, or if I want information about anything, I can quickly Google and find out instead of waiting for someone to read out the information like I did when I was a child. And if I were to, these days, community support is really essential. If I want to know what are the latest developments in the field of visual impairments, I can quickly connect with my peers on various mailing lists and attend forums like these and know about the latest development in technology. I should say the biggest, when it comes to science labs and other areas of specialization, there is where technology plays the biggest role. Suppose I'm visually impaired and I want to conduct experiments regarding reflection and refraction. So I want to know what is light, whether it's passing through the object or not. Then depending on whether the technology beeps or not, I know that if the object is opaque or transparent. So I cannot think of even one area of my life where technology is not useful. So we are heavily dependent on technology.
Yeah, no. And how does that relate to the emerging economy context that Malcolm was referring to in the introduction, and particularly for education and for children in developing their skills? How are you looking at developing affordable assistive technologies for this specific children community for education purposes? Could you talk a little bit about the experience you and the Vision Empowerment Foundation has in this regard?
Yes, so when we started with Vision Empower 4.5 years ago, we started realizing that there had been so many challenges and visually impaired kids were completely left out of STEM education. So that's where we decided to provide textbook content in accessible format, including all the diagrams. We started conducting teacher trainings, and slowly we realized that without technology, we cannot go too far, especially when COVID pandemic started. So we realized that without technology, our solutions cannot scale up. So this is where we realized that our teachers and students were finding it very difficult to refer to the content after school. So what the students hear in class, that's it. They don't take notes, they don't go home and study because there were not enough reference material. And also the material that was available was not useful. So if you watch a YouTube video as a blind person, so you'll hear, something like, this is how a triangle is constructed, and you multiply these two, you get 40, but you start wondering what two numbers were multiplied to get 40. So the content is fully inaccessible, especially when it comes to math and science. So we realized that we have to somehow make these material available, and that's where we started looking for options and realized that a lot of learning management platforms that were currently existing were not accessible for a child with visual impairments. Either the web portal or the platform itself was not accessible, or the content was not accessible. So that's where we designed our own learning management platform, which is called Subodha, and which many users are now using and are very comfortable with using our website. And we are also looking at app to make it more convenient for teachers and students. Yet another technology that we have developed through another for-profit organization of Vision Empower, which is called Wemby Technologies, is Hexis. It is a braille book reader which is designed specifically for children with visual impairments. So here the problem, when I was a child, I would not find enough material in my regional language, and also all the braille material takes a lot of time to get printed, and then reading becomes very much impossible, that you don't even get your textbook content in braille. And children's reading and comprehension skills are negatively impacted, and that negatively impacts the career and other areas of life also. So this is why we wanted to make all the academic material as well as lot of stories and everything else that's fun for children to read. So that's why we have come up with the world's most affordable braille book reader, which if you provide any content on the web platform that we have developed, it automatically converts into braille, and any child can read any content instantly.
Excellent.
So that is our technology portfolio.
Excellent. Very, very interesting. It actually leads me to ask a Brad question. So Brad, as the CIO of CloudSight, you've been working with different versions of big data AI to assist both the fully blind and the visually impaired. How do you see the potential of AI, and what are the recent advances around the different elements of AI that can help improve the lives of persons with disabilities or special needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've actually seen some pretty amazing things with AI over the past. I mean, we've been around for 10 years now, and one of the most important feedback points I think that we've gotten is that AI, and particularly in our case, computer vision, can help people gain independence again. So they can do things unassisted that previously, they might have to interrupt somebody to get some assistance for. And we've heard just again and again how empowering that's been, over all these 10 years we've been around doing this. But there's a lot of different areas that I think AI can help with. In computer vision in particular, there's and I know we have some other panelists on the discussion here too that are in the same area. We've specifically focused on this idea of visual cognition and understanding. So in the computer vision space, there's a couple of different types of technologies, some that recognize kind of the bits and pieces of what's going on in the visual space. We've focused more on an unbounded problem. So essentially, when you take a picture of something and you want to have AI read it back to you or understand what it is and describe it to you, we focused a lot on developing artificial intelligence that had reached a level of what we call visual cognition and understanding. And so what that means is that when the computer vision looks at a particular scene or object, we wanted it to describe it back to the user. So much like a human, we have a limited amount of vocabulary, and then we can mix and match those words together to describe a nearly infinite amount of things, ideas, etc. And so we focused on creating an AI that could essentially take a look at a scene or a video or anything that somebody's taking a picture of, and then describe it back to the user. And so in so doing, it's been able to give our users a way of gaining independence again in the world, and understanding more and more about the world around them. You know, AI has continued to kind of develop over this past decade very rapidly. There's a lot of new technologies that have come out, especially recently. One very fascinating thing that's been a lot of attention's been put into is this idea of understanding emotional intelligence from, you know, different types of surroundings and people. I mean, you know, in the sighted community, it's very, you know, we read a lot of information from people's faces about what their current state of emotion is, you know, potentially recognizing an attacker, all these different things that we kind of take for granted. And so there's some attention that's been put into this idea of understanding how people are, you know, essentially feeling, and how their current state of emotional, you know, feelings and stuff. And that can help us understand how people are going to be interacting with each other. So there's some interesting things happening there. Virtual assistants have been a really important you know, development in AI that I think have been very helpful to the accessibility space. But, you know, in particular in the computer vision community, there's been a lot more advancement in this idea of NLP, or natural linguistic processing, natural language processing, where computers are understanding more and more about language. And so that's, you know, in combination with computer vision, you know, we've at CloudSight taken advantage of that tremendously in being able to create computer vision that describes things. But on the other hand, it creates a much richer dynamic experience with people interacting with artificial intelligence, because these ideas can be expressed and understood by the AI, whereas previously the technology was recognizing, you know, in the computer vision space, bits and pieces of images. So this is definitely something that's moved along quite a bit, especially in the past few years. There have been many advances in this idea of understanding language. GPT, you might have heard of, has been in the news a lot recently. OpenAI has been putting a lot of effort into that. That's been helpful. The other thing that's in the AI space, and particularly in computer vision, but also in other types of AI, is this idea of affordance templates. So, for example, you know, how do you know that a particular object is twistable, grabbable, breakable? You know, these things that tell us what we can and can't do with a particular object is something that's had more and more attention placed towards it.
Thanks, Brad. I was actually at a conference here in Tallinn, Estonia, on social security and digital transformation all of last week. And we spoke a lot about translating unstructured data and making sense of that with neurolinguistics algorithms, you know, translating the everyday language into the taxonomies of government and social service provision. But I'd like to jump to you, Aidan, and speak particularly about the hearing impaired and some of the work that you're doing at Right Here. So obviously representing the private sector, what is the problem that you're currently working with at Right Here? And what is the differences between the orientation and the navigation that I see that you work with when it comes to your solutions?
Oh, now you can hear me. Sorry. Thank you so much, Martin. And it's actually a great bridge from Brad's talk and from videos earlier than that. I'm Aidan with Right Here. We're turning public spaces into more accessible environments for people with orientation challenges, including people who are blind or visually impaired, or with basically everyone who has some sort of orientation challenges. And I think it's a great bridge from what Brad has talked, because what we're fascinating about is the bridge between the digital accessibility and the physical built world around us. As Vidya said, she's using everything with technology, even with today for this Zoom panel, she's using screen reader. And when you think about it, almost all or a lot of the digital space around us has been dramatically improved around the accessibility. There's still a lot of work to be done. But on the other hand, not much has been done on the built environment and the space around us. And this is exactly what right here is actually focusing on, describing the space around you. We are all aware of movies that are audio described, I believe, and we're working on describing better the environment, the space around you, so people could basically orientate themselves in a better way. Which leads me to answer your second question about the difference between orientation and navigation. What Right Here is doing with an app that we developed is allowing our users to better orientate in public spaces, whether if it's outdoors or indoors. We're doing that in over 2,000 locations worldwide, giving them audio descriptions about where they are, what is there, what's around them, ultimately allowing them to be more independent wherever they go, absolutely free, Android and iPhone. And I think, you know, when we are all talking here about eventually promoting inclusion, at the end of the day, all of the disabilities, the accessibility solution that we're all part of or working on, at the end of the day are serving a bigger, I think, goal of inclusion. And personally, I believe that by making public spaces more accessible, we're directly promoting this inclusion. Within workplace, for example, it's not enough having just the digital space or just the software space accessible. It is also important that people will be able to find themselves around in the building, the office building, to the office, to the meeting room, or even to the restrooms. So the difference, again, to answer your question, the difference between navigation and orientation is instead of, with navigation, basically what you do is going from point A to point B, like as a turn-by-turn type of experience, which is super important, especially if you're trying to get to your specific desk or to a specific point in the building. Orientation is a bit different. It's more like talking signs when you think about it, hearing where you are, what is there, what's around you. So you can basically, based on that information, decide where do you want to go. It gives you basically the information you need to explore the area. So that's a bit of the difference between them. And I hope it answers, Morten.
It sounds a little bit to me that you're trying to do for the hearing impaired what augmented reality would do for me when I'm trying to design, you know, what sofa I want in my new living room. So showing that there's also other applications of technology can actually have a great impact for a very specific user group, not just something funny for me to do to avoid having to go to IKEA once too often.
Exactly.
So that. But it leads me to like linking the orientation part, and you mentioned it actually, Idan, was the office environment, the work environment. So Renee, you work with the adaptability of companies related to both physical but also to digital. So what is it that you're doing at Lazarillo to help companies improve the work conditions and the work environment around persons with disabilities, and what have you found is working and not working from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a great question. So I think that when we're talking about the meaning of the work environments and how companies need to employ people with disabilities, we have talked about multiple things in this panel, how technology can embrace education, how we can use different solutions to provide more context, awareness of the user surroundings, as well as visualization, right, of context. But at the end, humans needs to work, right? And I think it's really important for people to have access to work. And there are many companies out there saying that, yeah, no, we want to promote inclusion, but they don't hire people with disabilities because they think it's too complicated. They think that it's impossible. And on our side, what we do is that we show companies how they can improve their company hiring people with disabilities, as well as embracing new technologies. For example, we hire people with disabilities just making them available software that they can utilize independently so they can do their work more efficiently. So in Lazarillo, we have a global community of users that is 240,000 users now. We're always growing. And one of the key important things that we're working on is how we can help them reach new opportunities, how we can help them reach organizations that are teaching new skills, technology, on how they can improve access to employment, how they can then go to work, right, and have a better commute in that process. So in Las Rilo, we have a huge, I would say, responsibility on how we support our users, but then also we work with different companies, from public organizations to private organizations, helping them improve their services. From a university that is providing education, we support them on helping them going from their current status to embracing students with disabilities and provide them different tools so that those students can have better results and more independence in their, I would say, student life. So I think any context is different, especially depending on where you're working on. If you're working in Europe, it's way different than working in Latin America, or working in Asia, or working in the United States, because regulations varies from country to country. And so, but in general, I would say that collaboration is really important, because when you collaborate with local institutions, you can then grow. And then when you teach and support local institutions, you are able to create new opportunities. And one of the things that we do, for example, is that we provide free workshops for organizations globally. And we have done that, I would say last year we did workshops for over 200 orientation and mobility instructors that were using Las Rilo, and then we help them improve that process on how they teach their students and how those students and beneficiaries improve outcomes with using our technology, right? But at the end, they are the ones that teach locally, and they understand the local needs. And so it's kind of the same for companies. Companies need to understand how they can improve from where they are now to the next status, I would say. And that will help the company. They will also, in some countries, be more compliant with on how much they're hiring people with disabilities. And it will improve their outcome as a company, because it will be more diverse. And so if you're a company that you're selling a product or a service, you need to think on globally on how, and locally, how diverse is the community. And so sometimes companies are not aware that their software is not accessible, that their accounting software is not accessible, for example, or their e-commerce is not accessible. So people that want to buy from them, they cannot. And so they will say, no, our user experience is great, but then someone with a screen reader gets into the website and cannot buy anything. So that's horrible. And of course, they are not aware. And when they are aware, and then they hire, for example, someone with a disability that is part of the team that improves, for example, the e-commerce, is much better, for example. And that's, I would say, what I think the world should be moving forward, or how you can have a more diverse workforce that embrace your products and services that you are developing, either as a private company and in government too. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Rene. It actually reminds me of a couple of Danish projects. So from Copenhagen myself, there was a lot of debate about physical accessibility a few years ago. And the Danish Association for People with Disabilities, Physical Disabilities, actually made a point of redesigning their new headquarters to be fully compliant with all the recommendations, both from the UN and others, to show that it doesn't cost more to be accessible when you think it in from the beginning. A similar discussion I've participated in as a civil servant about whether or not web accessibility is costly. And naturally, it is costly if you're trying to retrofit, but if you're not building, compared to if you build it in from the beginning. So the argument that accessibility is more costly is only really the case if you retroactively have to retrofit, rather if you think it in from the beginning. We have, unfortunately, a cancellation. Tiffany's been busy with another meeting that's running late, so she sends her her apologies. But we have a couple of questions from the online chat that links to some of the discussions that we've had. So Bjorn Hay has a question around the motivational aspects around web accessibility. Some IT companies build it in from the beginning. It's part of what they do, and then do their usability on that, where others are less motivated by that. So again, we see that also with government websites and solutions that, although there are standards in place that are often mandatory, such as the VCAC standard in the public sector, the compliance level or the motivation to comply is not always there. What is the experience from the panelists on in the private sector and the public sector motivation to work with web accessibility in particular? I don't know if there's any volunteers.
Sure, I can go ahead with this. We've been really excited to see some startups achieve funding and a lot of success with this idea of web accessibility. There's a company called Accessiby, and they focused pretty intensely on the idea of making the web accessible for various users. And so, we've done some work with them, and they've been really kind of growing quickly in that space. So it's great to see companies like them continue to work on this idea of accessibility. There's been a lot of effort too, I know at Google, with the alt text metadata. They've been focusing more on, helping or giving increased priority to websites that implement alt text metadata for images, helping screen readers then go and interpret those images on the sites.
Okay. Vindhya, maybe you have something to contribute, particularly in relation to children and education, or STEM, as you were talking about earlier. Is there something there that companies could do to make things more accessible for the visually impaired with respect both to education, and build that in from the beginning? So in the ideal world, that all the worthwhile initiatives that organizations like yourself are doing and promoting would not necessarily be needed in the future.
Yes, so what I feel is when it comes to STEM accessibility, so yes, definitely for a lot of organizations which produce STEM content, make them accessible right from the beginning. That makes life much easier. But when it comes to STEM, there also needs to be tactile material which will supplement the digital part, because without a lot of touch and feel, the necessary visual memory that is necessary for comprehending any diagram or any visual part will not be developed unless and until the visually impaired child touches the tactile diagram and feels it. So I feel a combination of both digital resources as well as tactiles may be needed, especially during the early years till the visual memory is sufficiently developed. But saying so, definitely if the content providers provide much more accessible content, that will be a huge step. And also in countries like India, where we are still not there, like many children do not have even resources that are even devices that will be needed to access these content. So many children use smartphones, and math content that is not being read by smartphones as of now. So when it comes to accessing content on laptop, there are few plugins that you can use to read math. So a lot of developers have to think on those lines as well, because technology should be affordable, because 90% of the people live in developing and yet to be developed countries. 90% of visually impaired people live in these countries where they cannot afford these solutions.
So there's a couple of other questions from the audience. Quarantine Goud asked specifically about some of the other activities that the Commonwealth Office is doing in emerging economies about promoting digital inclusion. So I'll tag a question to that, so to speak. So Vijay talked about children. I'm with the United Nations University, and we work with UNICEF on what the impact on children and their parents and dependents are in relation to the service transformation. So now everything is increasingly digital. What does that mean to kids, the young adults that do have rights and obligations with government services, or even children that access services through their parents? What is the Commonwealth Secretariat doing, Sebastian, if anything, to promote and encourage the digital inclusion in the partnership countries? You talked a bit about standards. How does the UK experience in government with the Digital Government Office and the design standards play into that, if at all? Do you have any good examples from your work or that you have seen when you've worked in different partner countries that helps do this, like this digital inclusion from the beginning element?
Yeah, so I mean, I can just give another example of sort of one of the projects that we've done. So our digital access program team in South Africa, in the British High Commission, they work with Blind SA to deliver a project for developing COVID-19 content in accessible formats. And that's increased awareness and information regarding the pandemic for blind and partially sighted people. But the project then also digitized over 1,000 book titles for increasing access to local content in accessible braille and audio formats through a public bookshare platform. And that project has only just recently finished, having made these resources accessible for 500 blind and partially sighted people through the platform. But I mentioned at the beginning, there's a kind of, this very much integrates with our other work around digital inclusion. And I think there was a question about what kind of digital accessibility means. And I think it is, we do try and work at all the different levels of thinking through, well, what is the infrastructure you need to have in place? So are people being reached by the right kinds of connectivity? What kinds of devices do people need? What kinds of content do people need? What kinds of skills do people need? But also then a kind of more systemic level about working with governments on those kind of technical standards and trying to get those incorporated at a sort of national level. So yeah, I'd say kind of those are the kind of approaches we're taking, and that's another example. I think another one in here where, in conjunction with the earlier project that we did, that I mentioned before, we had a companion project with our local partner Enable, where we're working with the ICT Authority and Kenya Bureau of Standards to develop and operationalize a national ICT accessibility standard across Kenya. So they can Enable conducted a gap analysis, a technical accessibility audit, and a compliance testing of assistive technologies for various government service portals, and then conducted sensitization workshops to socialize the changes with government officials, projects facilitating the drafting of national accessibility standards by a technical committee, and then conducting a public review and interpretation of the draft before agreeing the implementation framework for the standards. So that's just another example of where we're kind of working on the standards level, but then it kind of, a lot of the work that we're doing around all the other different levels that I mentioned kind of will have repercussions for digital accessibility for persons with disability.
It sort of reflects a bit on some of the work we did in Denmark in the Danish Agency for Digitization when we developed the usability guidelines and the web accessibility standard. That you had the technical standards as such to enable the screen readers, etc., the software solutions to improve accessibility, but it went beyond that. It was also about a common look and feel across government websites, common look and feel in the transactional services, minimizing the content to some extent. So the less is more principle, which benefits all users, including the most excluded, whether or not that's because of a disability or cognitive learning experiences or else. So it became something about everyday language use. Yeah. and calling a spade a spade. Carlos actually asked a bit about how the private sector then becomes more inclusive and accessible. So maybe there's a question for our private sector representatives on that. And maybe is that the question you want to answer, Renee, or is it more about physical accessibility and organizations? But please go ahead.
No, I want to answer that question. Yeah, because when we work with companies, they're kind of in that status sometimes that what is the first step, right? What I need to do, what is the first thing I need to do in order to go from where I am right now to the next phase? And most of the time depends on the company. What is your main operations? If you are, for example, if you're a company that sells direct to consumer, you could try to focus, for example, in how you make that more accessible, but also you can also work inside. And sometimes companies already have multiple departments for all those areas, right? So they have the UX team, and then they have the human resources team that are embracing inclusion, but they are not fully aware how to reach talent that have disability, that, I don't know, they don't understand accommodations, for example. They will think that the job that they're offering is not possible for someone with a disability to do. And most of the time that is wrong, right? That is, and so the idea is to, I think that one of the good steps forward is to find consulting from different companies, because they will show you different aspects of how you can turn your company more accessible on your website, on your human resources side, right, on how you hire people. I believe that eventually one of the key steps is to hire people with disabilities and be part of the team that move accessibility forward in your organization. In Lazarillo, we also help them do some step forwards in terms of physical and digital accessibility with our solutions, but I would say that is not the whole answer. The whole answer is to kind of like check how your organization as a whole needs to move forward in terms of accessibility. So that you might be able to find consulting in internet, and then how to find someone with disability or employ them. It's not so difficult sometimes. Sometimes you need to ask them, like, what are the things that you will require to do this job? If they are applying, most of the time they already know what they need to do. So you are hiring a sales rep, they are using a CRM, email, and all that, and all those things, you are able to find solutions that are accessible, and they will probably guide you on what they need to use to make their job more efficient. So yeah, that's what I have to say. You could also just start hiring people and make it open. Yeah.
Thank you, Renee. Idan, what has your experience been, and how are you seeing this question from your angle?
Thank you, Mona. I just wanted to echo and add to that a few more things, because I completely agree with you, Renee. There's been saying nothing about us without us, and I think this is exactly what he's also talking about, including people with disabilities in the process of evaluating the level of accessibility at that space. I think it's super important, especially during because of the fact that a lot of times there is a gap between what it means to, and this is maybe back to your anecdote before, Morten, there is a gap between what it means to be compliant with the different regulations of accessibility and what it really means to be accessible. Not a lot of times there is alignment between them. Sometimes you can be compliant, but not as accessible as it can be. And sometimes, by the way, it can be accessible, but it not necessarily will help you to be more compliant, which is absurd. Again, it's in different countries, it's a bit different. But making sure that it's truly accessible, that's the real goal, I guess, for us as a society. To achieve that, I think that having people with disabilities along that process is a key. And another thing, just because it's a huge challenge, I think another thing that can help is understanding that it's a progress, not just a perfection. It's a challenge. Making a space or anything accessible fully for all different type of disabilities is a challenge. There is no, I guess this is one of the reasons why there's so many technologies and companies working in the field. So combining these different technologies and remembering that it's making a progress towards perfection and not avoiding doing anything, because nothing of them is perfect, I think is also an important thing to keep in mind. And yeah.
Thank you, Aidan. I'd like to remind everybody here and in the audience that the WSIS Forum has actually been collecting good practice cases over the years on all different types of topics related to the SDGs, but also to the different action lines of the WSIS Forum. So some of these things around technology and accessibility, there's some good practice examples in the WSIS database on that. Also, I think there's a couple of the national usability guides globally emerging the last 10 years that gives good directions around both the web accessibility standards like VCAG and particularly the AA level compliance that all European Union member states, for instance, have signed up for, that address this and how it's been structured with both language use, form and function, and so forth, that may be of inspiration to some of you in the audience today. And of course, there's the UN Universal Accessibility Charter on physical access as well. So there's one more question. We're running out of time, but I see that another question following up on the discussions just popped in. And it relates to sort of these observations around the compliance level with standards. Yeah. So for instance, in a project we did with the Parliament of Georgia, the country in the Caucasus, the Parliament was looking for the physical accessibility and web accessibility. And the compliance should not just be for the public sector, but for the private sector. This would be across website, solution, apps, even electronic voting. And even in a physical sense, voting is not always fully accessible for people with special needs. So what are the things that you see from your perspectives, any short sort of contributions about how do we ensure this compliance of a government standard, even within government? Is there any takes on that before we close the session? No?
Well, I'm always a favor of, some sort of an incentive structure. Are there tax breaks that can be had for certain companies that implement certain types of accessibility features? It's certainly, when we have government regulation, obviously there's an aspect of that helps the government entities go and build these things into their websites, their apps, and all sorts of things. But in the private sector, the regulation tends to have sort of a dampening effect sometimes on the development of new technology, the advancement of the space, et cetera. So I've always been a fan of incentives to try to help these companies spur them into different things. And then perhaps we'll see some additional innovation, perhaps we'll see some additional development on, both websites and also apps that help them become more accessible. I know, even recently, Google in implementing these new features with incentivizing websites that have alt text metadata, that's a method of incentive that will encourage developers to build more accessibility features into their websites. And so that's just kind of one example that very recently that's been happening that I think has been moving this forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Brad. It's actually something I can mirror myself. We see a number of national governments, particularly these agencies specialized in digital transformation and service delivery, sort of driving the web accessibility standard through usability guidelines for the public sector, at least. And that's a good start, but they do that by ensuring that there's both sort of a carrot and a stick approach, particularly within the government. The first to comply to a government standard should be the government, not everybody else. So there is some movement. Again, the Georgian parliament was very ambitious in saying, no, this is not just a standard for government solutions. It should be a standard applying for the private sector, even if it's voluntary at first and then it becomes mandated later on in life. So again, we see some movement in this area, although a lot more can be done. So I'd like to take the time to thank all of you for participating. Also, thank you for the questions from the audience. And there's Carlos has just linked in the chat, so quickly copy the link to all the different courses that ITU is offering if you're interested in that. But once again, thank you very much, and please join the rest of the week. There will be sessions on this topic and subtopics within ICT and accessibility for people with disabilities and special needs all week, and they will be on the same time as this one. So please check the agenda. And thank you once again for all your thoughts and your contributions. Have a nice afternoon, a nice evening, and a continuous good morning wherever you may be. Thank you.